Welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Block. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for Marin Humane. We're really excited to host this webinar about coexistence with coyotes. You know, it's certainly a hot topic, in particular for the residents of San Rafael. We want to thank the city of San Rafael for getting the ball rolling on creating this opportunity. I'll introduce the panelists and guests soon, but I wanted to make sure that any of our Spanish speakers know that we have interpreters joining us as well. And so if someone would like to listen to this webinar in Spanish, there's an interpretation icon on the Zoom toolbar. It looks like a little globe, and you click on that, and that will lead you to a separate room where there's the interpreter there. And just turn off the main sound as well, so you don't hear us droning in English while you're trying to hear the Spanish. So anyway, just briefly, housekeeping, we have a lot of information to cover, and we want to welcome your questions. You can post your questions in the Q&A. I'm going to be trying to keep track of them, and then after the panelists have spoken, I will refer the questions to different people. I might combine a few questions if some of them are the same. So just wanted to let you know how that format works. What else, anything else I'm missing, anyone, before I go ahead and briefly explain what we're going to do? We're good? Okay. So we're going to have first Shannon Burke from Marin County Parks is going to be speaking, and after her, Kelly Hendricks with Project Coyote, followed by Cindy Machado of Marin Humane. And then after that, we will have a chance for people to ask questions. I wanted to also share that we've got a couple of folks here from Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's really important that we have their participation, so we're grateful for their time. They're not a panelist, but they'll be here and can probably answer some questions that they happen. One last caveat, I'm going to put myself on mute, but my dog may bark. This is Marin Humane. Most of us have dogs, so sorry if that happens. So without further ado, Shannon, if you want to take it away.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. And I think it's really wonderful that everybody has tuned in to learn more about coyotes. You can go to the next slide. So tonight we are basically going to talk about why coyotes do what they do, and also some things that you can do in response. So we'll be talking about, we'll do an overview of the natural history of coyotes, successful coexistence strategies, and look at the history of the Marin Coyote Coalition, and just get some tips about what you all can do. Next slide. As Lisa said, I am the interpretive naturalist for Marin County Parks, and we don't have jurisdiction over any of these areas that some of these conflicts are happening in, but we have a lot of experience with coyotes and humans and dogs interacting. So next slide. So I am basically going to cover the why, the reasons behind the behaviors that coyotes are exhibiting, and we'll look at the basic life history. So that's kind of what's going on seasonally, and how they're interacting with, how coyotes are interacting with each other, and how they're interacting with other species. Next. So first, let's look at what coyotes are doing at any given time of year. So in the winter time, they are establishing their dens. So they're figuring out where they're going to give birth to the pups. And then in the spring, the pups are born and they stay with the mother inside of the den, and she's nursing them. And then in the summer, the pups continue to grow, and eventually they're weaned. And then they end up venturing out of the den area, and they start to accompany their parents. And during this time, they're learning how to find food on their own. And then in the fall, some of those young may disperse, and they may leave their family pack. And you also have the formation of pairs, so that might be new pairs, or you also have existing pairs that are reestablishing their bonds. They're sort of recommitting to each other. And then you also have territories that are being established. So the pairs are defining their territories and sort of increasing their vocalizations with all of this coyote happenings that are going on. You get a lot of vocalizations in the fall. Next. So vocalizations happen for a lot of different reasons. Coyotes use them for in a lot of different contexts. But one thing to keep in mind is that one coyote is capable of making more than one sound at a time. So they're actually able to sort of layer sounds on top of each other. And what that means is one coyote can sound like a couple coyotes can sound like several, and several can sound like a whole bunch of coyotes. So they use vocalizations to greet each other. So if the coyotes go away from each other for a period of time, when they come back together, they get really excited. And so it's kind of like if a human leaves the house and comes back, their dog gets really excited. So they can yip and howl and make different noises. And then they also use vocalizations to communicate across distances. So pack mates can kind of keep tabs on each other and they can tell where the other one is. And then they also use vocalizations to define territories. So if you have a pack in one area, they can sort of let other coyotes in the area know, like, hey, we're here, this is our territory, don't come here. And then it's also a way for coyotes to assess their population size, to figure out how many other coyotes are out there. And this might help young coyotes to determine whether or not they want to forage out on their own or if they want to stay with their own pack. And another thing I just want to point out is there's this common misconception that coyotes howl over their kill. But if you think about it, this wouldn't really make sense. Coyotes often are found in areas where they overlap with things like wolves and bears, animals that are a lot bigger than them. And if they were advertising that they had food, these other animals might actually come and take it away from them. So I think before we go to the next slide, I just kind of want to tell you what it is, because I think it'll start playing. So there is a video with audio, and it is a couple of coyotes vocalizing. And I just want you to note, you'll be able to see that this is sort of a happy greeting. They're really excited to see each other, but also listen and see if you can sort out all of the different sounds that these animals are making. Okay, next slide. Okay, next slide. So as you can see, that was just coyotes being really happy to see each other. And there were, I think, 4 coyotes in there, but it just sounded like a whole bunch of coyotes. Okay, so the social dynamics of coyotes. So packs are typically made up of family members, and only the alpha male and the alpha female breed and produce young. And these pairs are monogamous and they mate for life. And so while the mother is in the den nursing the young, the fathers and sometimes siblings from previous years are going out and they're helping to find food and bring it back, and they help to raise the litter, help to raise the young all together. So they have really strong family bonds, but they will sometimes spend time apart. And so as we just saw, when they come together, you know, they greet each other, things like that. But sometimes, depending on if there isn't enough food or other resources are limited, or even different personalities exist in coyotes just like they do in people. And so sometimes individuals might not get along. And so you can have some coyotes that will live independently. They'll go off and they're solitary, and those tend to not have territories. They don't establish a territory the way that a pack does. So the packs are territorial though, and they will keep the solitary coyotes from coming into their territory. Next slide. So it can be helpful to remember that in any given area, the number of coyotes depends on what the resources are, what resources are available. And so that can be important to keep in mind when we're thinking about, you know, in some cases, if coyotes come into an urban area and there might be some conflict, some people think that killing them might be the best approach, but it really isn't effective. So in any given area, the number of coyotes is limited by these resources. So it's how much food is available and if there are safe places to raise their young. And so you end up with stable packs. And again, that's the alpha male and the alpha female that are reproducing. They're the only ones that are reproducing. And they typically have pretty small litter sizes. And so that might be 5 or 6 pups. And just as an aside, typically only about half of those pups survive their first year. So that's a stable pack. But if you go in and you start removing coyotes, if you kill coyotes, that disrupts the whole social dynamic. But also, you basically end up with an abundance of resources for the coyotes that still remain. And so they respond by breeding more. And so they end up having an increase in the number of pairs that are breeding, as well as an increase in the number of young in each litter. So it's kind of like they overcompensate to fill the void of the coyotes that have been removed. And so you end up having fewer coyotes at first, and then it swings the opposite direction and you have an increase in coyotes. And then eventually it ends up balancing back out and you end up with the number of coyotes that that area can support. And so ultimately you end up with the same amount of coyotes that you started off with. Next slide. So here's an example of a female with a really large litter. So again, this is atypical. Usually they're smaller. But this is what can happen when you disrupt that social dynamic by removing coyotes from an area. Next slide. So it can be helpful to think about why coyotes are coming into our neighborhoods by looking at their diet and what they eat and what's attractive about our neighborhoods. So there's this huge study that was done. It's the largest study of urban coyotes that has been done in the world, and it's ongoing. It's been going on for over 20 years. And this study is in the greater Chicago metropolitan area. So it includes the city of Chicago and surrounding areas, including neighborhoods and parks. And they have looked at over 200 coyotes, and they looked at the scat, the feces basically, to determine what these coyotes were eating. And so these coyotes were found in a lot of different types of areas where they were living near humans. And so it's this great study to look at. So the majority of what they were eating was rodents, followed by fruit, and then also deer. And so coyotes rarely take down adult deer, but they eat fawns, and that can actually help sort of slow overpopulation in the number of deers. And then they also ate rabbit. And in this study, at least, they very rarely took domestic cats. So that was only 1.3%. Next slide. So another thing to think about when coyotes are coming into our neighborhoods or living near us is the availability of dens. And so sometimes they can make a den under a deck or under a structure like a house or a shed or something like that. In the wild, they tend to have burrows. They dig out the dens, or they'll take advantage of a crevice in a rock or a natural cave or something like that. So it's important to keep in mind that dens are only used during the spring. They're only used until the pups are weaned, and that pups can be moved frequently. So They may not spend the entire time that they're in the dens in one den. And this can be helpful to think about, that if coyotes are in an area, it may only be temporary. Next slide. But if you get too close to a den, that's where their young are, right? And they are very good parents and they're very protective. And so they will respond defensively. And sometimes this is directed at people. And so if you get this body language, you know that you're too close to a den, but usually it's directed at dogs. And so what they do is they raise their hackles, they may lower their head, they may show their teeth, they may vocalize, they may bark. And all of this is they want to look really big and scary. And they actually want to avoid contact, because if you think about it, if a coyote is bitten or scratched, that could become infected and that could be bad news. So the whole point of this behavior is to be intimidating, is to try to scare the threat, and usually it's a dog, out of their territory. Next. So why would a coyote feel threatened by a dog? So coyotes and wolves have co-evolved. They evolved at the same time. And in a lot of places, their ranges overlap. And wolves can be 2 to 3 times bigger than a coyote. They're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster. And wolves are known to actually seek out coyotes and kill them and kill their young. And there have even been accounts of wolves digging out dens and killing the young. So coyotes have a reason to feel threatened by wolves. Next slide. And coyotes, wolves, and dogs are all descended from a lineage of ancient wolves that are now extinct. But current genetic analysis suggests that domestic dogs and gray wolves are actually the same species, with the domestic dog being a subspecies. So if coyotes have reason to fear wolves, this might help explain why they perceive a dog in their territory, if a dog is near their young, as a very real threat. Next slide. So this can be really good to keep in mind, and also to keep in mind that if you're seeing behavior like this, it is defensive behavior. It's not offensive, right? This is coming from a place of fear, and they are trying to protect their young. Next slide. So hopefully it can be helpful to understand some of the whys behind why they're behaving the way they do, but also there are some things that you can do. And one of those is called hazing. And hazing is basically being big and loud and scary and just trying to scare coyotes. And Kelly and Cindy are going to talk in a lot of detail about how you go about doing this. But I just wanted to point out 2 particular examples that have been documented. They're part of studies. And so one was from this big urban coyote research project that was done in the Chicago area again. And there was one particular individual that was radio collared. A lot of the coyotes in the study are radio collared. So they were able to track his movements, and he had a den in an area. And over the course of about a week in the month of April, he started to have interactions with dogs and dogs on leash, and he was coming in contact with them. It didn't result in any injuries, but there was this sort of elevated interaction. And they were able to tell, because they knew exactly who this individual was, that prior to the breeding season, he hadn't had any interactions with humans or dogs. And so they decided to haze this individual. And so they went out, and 3 evenings in a row, they just acted really scary. They made a bunch of noise. They did a lot of things to deter this coyote. And after just 3 nights, the coyote actually no longer was interacting with dogs. And so they assumed that he moved the den to a more remote location. And so after that, there were no further interactions. Next. And then also in 2019, so just a few years ago, the USDA, through the division of that, the National Wildlife Research Center, decided to do a study to see if, is hazing successful. And so what they did was they had some captive coyotes. They weren't domesticated, they weren't tame, but they were in enclosures. And then they had humans, they had adults and children, to perform various interactions, to have different encounters with the coyotes over a period of 5 days. And so the coyotes were on one side of the fence and the humans on the other. So the humans walked past them on their own, they walked past with a dog, and then they actually fed the coyotes. And so the coyotes became accustomed to humans. And then after that, they instructed the humans to actually start hazing the coyotes if they got near. And so they shook a can full of coins and they yelled, they stomped their feet and all of this. And so the results of the study were that with the increase in hazing, there was a decrease in coyotes approaching the humans. And so that suggests that coyotes they're super smart, right? And so they can learn really, really quickly to avoid a behavior that they don't like, and they don't like being hazed. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kelly, who's going to go into a lot more detail about hazing and discouraging coyotes from being around humans.
Thank you, Shannon. That was awesome. My name's Kelly Hendricks, and I'm the Ranching with Wildlife Coordinator for Project Coyote. I'm probably going to sound pretty bad because I've got COVID, as I just found out today, so I feel pretty crappy, but the show must go on. So when people, when I say I'm working with Project Coyote, they think sometimes they'll get the impression that, oh, I'm just some kind of, person that's crazy about coyotes and that's why I'm defending them. So I'm just going to give you a little background. My husband and I live on a cattle ranch where he's managed a cow-calf operation for about 30 years. We've raised thousands of calves alongside coyotes and other predators. And in addition, I foster orphan wildlife for Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue. And also I'm a vice president of a nonprofit dog rescue where we specialize on rescuing and rehoming little dogs, called Little Trooper Ranch. So I'm sympathetic to all sides of this issue. And if that sounds like a lot of work, it is. I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted before I got COVID. So, and I do all this on a volunteer basis. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because I'm doing this because I know it can work. I know that domestic pets, livestock, and wildlife and humans can all coexist peacefully and actually to the betterment of all of us. So that's why I've made it my mission to try to help. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to talk, my part's going to be about just safeguarding your yards and keeping your pets safer. So this is just an overview of the topics I'm going to cover regarding that. So we can go right to the next slide because I'm going to zip through this pretty quickly. Okay, so the first thing you need to do to keep your yard safe is to remove attractants. That means things like your pets. Your pets shouldn't be out unsupervised in your yards at night. And pet food and water, things like that need to be brought in because they're big attractants to other animals. Reducing some of the heavy brush and landscaping around your home is awesome. That will remove places where predators can hide. Picking up fallen fruit from trees. All these wild animals like skunks, raccoons, coyotes, they all love fruit. And also rodents, love fruit. So, and the rodents themselves are an attractant for all these animals because opossums, skunks, raccoons, coyotes eat tons of rodents. In fact, a single coyote eats 1,800 rodents in a year. So the rodents themselves are huge, and I'm sure none of us want rodents around our house anyways. And one of the biggest attractants is the fallen seed under bird feeders for rodents. That's a huge rodent attractant. And also the seeds themselves are attractants for all these. So if before night comes, if you clean up all those seeds, that will help tremendously. Wood piles are big rodent habitats. So if you have to stack wood, stack it away from your home so it keeps the rodents from getting into your home. But just know that those can be really enticing for rodents. And seal up access points into your yard. And I'm going to talk about that more in the next slide. You can go forward. So if you keep your home in very good repair and seal up all the entry points where wildlife can get in, it keeps your home value up. And so it's good to do anyways, regardless of the presence of wildlife. But you don't want to do these repairs, things like under your porch, your decks, your crawl spaces, any place where wildlife can enter, a lot of times on your roofs. You don't want to do those repairs in spring unless you really know what you're doing, or you have a professional come out and access whether there are babies left. Almost a lot of the orphan babies I get are because people see a raccoon in their backyard, then they have a pest control operator come out, they trap the raccoon, and they actually kill it. They're required to, by law, either kill it or release it on the same property. So they might not tell you this, but just know that they will kill it. And then, this problem's still not solved. And now, in another day or two, the people hear crying babies, and then they have to go into wildlife rescue. So if you're going to call somebody to help, call someone that does exclusion work and knows what they're doing, like Wild Care in Marin does a lot of exclusion work, and also a company called Mr. Raccoon provides exclusion work where they go in. They may trap the animals, but they will release them on site after they fix the problem. So the animals can go on living their life in peace, and your problem is fixed and nobody has to come back out again. Unlike this slide you see with the professional skunk removal, they've got a good customer there with that bird feeder. They'll go trap that skunk, kill it. And it's not done humanely. It's not monitored hardly at all. It's horrible. And then another skunk's going to come because the problem's not fixed, and it's just a revolving death trap for wildlife. So, and costly for the homeowner. So next slide. So deterrence, I'm not going to talk a lot about deterrence because this is a secondary kind of thing to use. Ideally, in a perfect world, you'll do the other things I talk about and you won't need the deterrence. But if you have things like backyard chicken coops, ponds, things like that, those can be a huge attractant. You might need a secondary thing, or if your fence, if it need a repair and you need a couple of days to help deter wildlife, these products can come in handy. The one on, you see the sprinkler, that's a motion censored sprinkler. So if something walks into the side of it, it turns on and scares them away. Things with strobe lights at night, if something sets it off, strobe lights are very disorienting and will usually scare an animal off. Most wildlife are pretty neophobic, especially coyotes, meaning they're scared of anything new in their environment. So a lot of times I use Halloween decorations. You can hit that. And this time of year, it's great to find things like that. This is another Halloween thing I got on the right. You can hit that one.
Because this would go to your...
Things like that. That's motion sensor. So you can put it on a fence line or something like that. If something triggers it, then it'll go off. Obviously, motion censored lights are nice to have, although a lot of urban coyotes get kind of desensitized to light. So, and if you're going to use these kind of deterrents, it's important. The scare deterrents, it's important to rotate them so the animals don't habituate to them. Okay, next slide.
Because this would go to your...
Yeah, there we go. Okay, now this is the real bread and butter of keeping your yard safe, is your fencing. So there's a couple of great products now that can prevent almost all problems from ever happening. And that's coyote rollers and dig defense. Coyote rollers are just roll bars that you can put on top of your fence. Ideally, in a perfect world, it'd be a 6-foot tall fence that didn't have a lot of spots where you could look through it. But honestly, 5 feet usually works too. So you just put this roll bar on top, and when animals jump fences, sometimes it happens so fast, it looks like they jump clear over in one fell swoop, but they actually touch the top with their paws and pull themselves over, and a roll bar just rolls them back right off. And the awesome thing about coyote rollers is it not only keeps wildlife out of yards, but it keeps dogs and cats in yards. So it's a great product. It can be a little pricey. So if you go to YouTube, you can Google do-it-yourself models of them. And dig defense is something back in the day when we wanted to keep things from digging under our yard. We'd have to trench and then lay down hardware cloth, and it was a big pain in the butt. But now you have dig defense, and it's just galvanized steel rods welded together, and you can just hammer them right in the ground around your fence line, and they work very well. Also, There's different kinds of cat fencing. If you don't want to use coyote rollers, there's other options. If you just Google it, some are cheaper. But coyote rollers are the tried and true ones, in my opinion. Next slide. So coyote rollers, I can't really speak to these other ones. I haven't tried them. Coyote rollers are great, but they do make other types of things if you want to do some research, other types of things that can keep cats in yards and wildlife out. Okay, next slide. Another great option for cats, if you really want them, a lot of people don't want to keep their cats indoors, and maybe your fence line isn't that great or impermeable, is to build a catio. They're awesome. You can do them as fancy or as bare bones as you want. You can see the one on the lower right is just a little runway attached to a window. Or I've seen some that are nicer than my house. I mean, some are really deluxe. So if you go online, and most of these links we will be sending in the recording if you want to access that later. So you can also get plans that you can buy online to build catios yourself. They're just a great option. There are cheaper ones that are portable, like you see on the bottom left. That's not really predator proof. They're not, I mean, maybe during the day, if you were supervising your cat, that would be a good alternative, but it's certainly not predator proof. Okay, next slide. So we all want to do our part to help keep our cats out of the food chain. And although we often think when we have cats that coyotes are the real danger to them, in truth, other domestic pets probably attack cats more than coyotes. Our other domestic pets attack our domestic pets more than wildlife are a problem for them. And cars, 6 million dogs and cats a year are hit by cars. So, and our domestic pets are more of a problem for wildlife than vice versa. So it's just another perspective to keep in mind. Next slide. So guidelines for walks. First of all, know the facts. And I kind of just covered those, that I know if you're not super familiar with coyotes, that those would be what you'd probably worry about more than the domestic animals, but the facts don't really back that up. Domestic dogs are probably a way bigger problem. So leashes are the #1 way to keep your pets safe on a walk. Almost every problem happens with an off-leash dog. I can't say every single one, but I'm saying you're lowering the chances that you'll have a problem hugely. So, and practice avoidance. That just means if you really don't want to see a coyote, you're just scared to death, just walk outside of the times between dusk and dawn. That's when you're they'll probably eliminate 80% the chances that you'll see any wild animal. That's okay, I've got it memorized. I think it's a hassle to go back. So also, important tip is if you're gonna walk at night, to use light up collars and leashes. And like I said, wildlife's pretty neophobic, so a coyote's less likely to attack, even though they rarely attack a dog on a leash. It's less likely even to attack a dog that's lighting up and flashing. But also, more importantly, it keeps you safer from car strikes, and your dog safer from car strikes. And also, along those lines, if you carry something like a storm whistle or some kind of alarm device that you can hit a button and it makes a really loud sound, that can not only protect you from coyotes, which is really the least likely thing to be a problem for you, but also human predators, which it's just a good idea, especially if you're elderly. If you fall or something, it's a good idea to have something like that on you. Okay, this slide shows what is often reported as a coyote attack, but I'm showing you what a lot of times what it really is. And this is a coyote. This is in spring or summer, and I can't remember which, but there's obviously a den site close by. And this is what coyotes do when they message a dog. So it's not an attack, it's not a predatory attack. It's simply how they message a dog to get it to move out of its territory. And it's interesting to watch them work because not only are they about the same size as our little border collies, a little bit smaller than border collies, but it shows how they work a lot like border collies when border collies work sheep or cattle. So, okay, you can play this. This bark is a vocalization coyotes make as a distress call. It means they're annoyed by something or there's a predator close by, something they're worried about. So, okay, you can move forward. Oh, so look, I'm already at the end. So the reason, and hazing was another thing I wanted to bring up. If a coyote approaches you, your home, your yard, or your pets, you can haze them. And Cindy's got a great video that's going to cover that. So I'm not going to go into the hows of it, but just know that that's something else you can consider. You don't want to haze a coyote when it's just being a coyote, but if you need to, if it's approaching you, your home, your yard, or your pets, hazing is another great thing to do. And I just included this quote, which is: the pessimist complains about the wind, the optimist hopes the wind will change, and the realist adjusts the sails. Coyotes are realists. They adjust their sails. And I think that's something we can learn from them to help us live peacefully with coyotes and other wildlife. So thank you. And I'm going to turn this over to Cindy.
Thank you, Kelly. You make being sick look really easy. And I know it's not. So we appreciate your ability to stay with us tonight. And thank you to all of us that are joining either live or will be watching this recording. We're really honored to be able to provide you with a little more in-depth information on coyotes. I'm the Director of Animal Services here for Marin, which means I get to have all the fun and craziness of what field and animal services brings us, including helping to manage coyotes. I've been here 38 years, and I can honestly say, when I hear people that say, never had a coyote in 50 years of living here, I can say, yes, there was a time where we rarely saw coyotes in the urban environment. So go ahead, next slide. We're going to kind of just go through what our role is in dealing with coyotes countywide, individual neighborhoods, and hope to inspire some more knowledge on why these animals are much more smarter than us at times. And I hold myself accountable for that too, because they outsmart me all the time. Anyway, Marin Humane, if you didn't know, we are the provider of animal services through a county contract, and we provide animal services for all of our cities. So it's nice to have one consistent county-wide offering of services. We do a lot on public safety with regard to animals, both domestic and wild, including their welfare. And one of our favorite things is what we're doing tonight, where we're working with other agencies and partner organizations on some of these sometimes complicated wildlife issues. Next, please. Next slide. Thank you. So just want to give a quick background, and this is important because for those of you that remember the days when you rarely saw or heard about coyotes entering our neighborhoods, that was true. And in about 2000, we started seeing small groups of coyotes entering areas. They started in southern Marin and Mill Valley. And there was one amazing biologist that was working with the United States Geological Society. Hope I have that acronym right. And she had an interest in following coyotes. And what that led to was her being able to get a permit to radio collar 3 coyotes, which in and of itself was a huge job, but she did it really easily. They were following these 3 coyotes. 2 of them, unfortunately, were hit by cars almost, months afterwards. But one coyote who she named Clint was the one that we learned the most from, and myself included in those lessons. Boy, he taught us so many important things, and we got to know him quite well because he was the only coyote in Marin running around with a green nylon collar. And we were able to track his whereabouts from his beginning stages in Alto Bowl region of Mill Valley all the way to the hub in San Anselmo and through San Rafael. So all of what we have learned is based on learning about these actual animals in Marin in the urban environment. One of the other really important things that we saw way back then that was really important, and thanks to Project Coyote for helping us, was to pass a local ordinance which banned the wildlife feeding. And why that's important is fed coyotes become problems. And that's been one of the most important messages we really want people to hear. Do not feed or befriend coyotes. As much as it would be fun to say you did, it only creates disasters for not just the coyotes, but all the other wildlife. Then the other partner that was really important was the National Park Service in the Golden Gate recreational area. They have some amazing staff that were very specialized in following coyotes. And one of our biggest projects was actually trying to convince tourists in the Headlands area not to feed coyotes. And we still have that challenge as of today. So when we have neighborhoods we can work with, we really like that. Tourist areas are still a challenge. And the bottom line for us is, collaborating, getting the dialogue out, and really making sure that the whole community is part of that process. Next slide, please. So, and I don't have control of the cursor, but Michelle, I don't know if you could point Clint out. He's almost right there. That is Clint many years ago. And that's where he lived, high atop Horse Hill in Mill Valley. He raised a family. He fathered many pups. Unfortunately, he got really good at killing outdoor cats. Many of those cats that succumbed to Clint, people thought were a serial killer in the works, mutilating animals, including many veterinarians. We just didn't see that. And we had to learn about, what that was all about, and really encourage people to keep their cats in. So we do owe Clint a little bit of thanks for everything he passed along to us, even the unpleasant part. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm the one that gets all of the frantic, awful, fearful calls of, why can't you just come and get this coyote? We have heard all of this. And I get it. If you don't know about coyotes, they're terribly fearful if you don't know what they're trying to tell you. My own late mother had a coyote encounter that she didn't believe a word I said. And what I think gets people riled up the most is when coyotes do kind of like a stare down, and they're trying to really trick us, and they do it very well. They tricked my mother several times out on her walks. And what they do is they'll, if you start hazing on, which we'll explain in a minute, they stop, they turn around, and they look at you. And that often gets misperceived that this coyote is stalking me, trying to get me. And what I'm trying to tell you is, yes, they're trying to trick you in thinking that that's all going to happen, but it's their natural defense mechanism. The coyote will attack my pets. Yes, they will. If we have unsupervised pets, they will. This is a rare thing with humans. We've gotten really good at convincing humans on how to properly behave around coyotes, how to properly haze them, how to get rid of attractants. We don't have any rabid coyotes in Marin. Usually it's in the bat populations we serve. So these are all really valid perceptions people often have when they call me. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a great little sampling of some of the Marin coyotes that my team has come across in the years. We've put 20 solid years into coyote management. They are in every neighborhood in Marin. They are out during the day, the dawn, the dusk, and midnight. What we do know, what we've really learned by them, is they're very quick to adapt and really smart. With Clint, we actually watched Clint cross one of the busiest East Blythedale stretches in Mill Valley, and he would always use the crosswalk and wait until the light was green for him to cross. He knew our animal services vehicles. When we would roll up, he would scatter far away because he knew we would haze him. But if Mill Valley Police Department rolled up, he would just stay in the street. So our coyotes in Marin are quick to learn, which is beneficial for us. They're in every neighborhood in Marin, and they're managed fairly easy by most neighborhoods. Next slide, please. Okay, how do we respond? I think the best and most important part is educating. and really spreading the word on what people can do, really taking steps to educate the public on, what coyotes are trying to tell us, how to be good land stewards, to not keep attractants and not having people feed them. We get a lot of calls on how do we keep our pets safe. We have a lot of trails in Marin. We have a lot of great walking neighborhoods. In all these areas, we're likely to have an encounter. And I think when I look back at everything that I had to learn, and believe me, I never thought I would be responding to coyotes when I started my job 38 years ago. What we have learned is the more things we can try that are different, the more that becomes really effective. Like Kelly mentioned with the Halloween decorations, absolutely anything that they haven't seen before or in a while, that really helps. Next slide, please. Okay, and these are all the areas that we would probably rate as being areas and events where we really want to know what's happening. So we often get calls by some neighborhoods that know of an actual den site with pups. We've had certain neighborhoods around Marin that actually cooperate with keeping their neighbors away from those den sites. We know when puppies disperse from coyotes because parents are out teaching them everything from where to go, where to drink, where to eat, where to get food, and even on school grounds. And I know that sounds really crazy, but we've actually worked with several schools throughout Marin when we've had coyotes actually on the school during the summer. Kids are back in school, and we've done so many school assemblies teaching children how to behave on their school ground or walking to school. And it's all been really well received and really effective. And just, I want to use the term, quote, aggressive with caution, as humans tend to perceive coyotes as being aggressive when in fact, it's actually a natural behavior that's not meant to be offensively aggressive at you, but to scare you so you back away. They're so fearful, by the way, when they're doing that behavior. And they're really trying to be brave and make you fear them so that you retreat. And when we behave the opposite way, then they will fear us and leave. Next slide, please. Okay, a little bit about feeding wildlife. And I know there's a lot of animal advocates in Marin County, and we appreciate that. But if you're truly an advocate for animals, you will honor the Mother Nature pact that we need wildlife to be able to fend for themselves without us intervening by feeding them, as hard as that is. But this is a great example of someone that was actually putting feed out specifically for turkeys that inadvertently attracted the deer, which inadvertently attracted the rats, which inadvertently attracts all the other small mammals. And this is just a setup for disaster on so many levels, from endangering the individual animal's health of potentially eating the wrong food. Some of the food we put out might be toxic to certain species, but this is like the worst scenario of trying to coexist peacefully for animals. We do not want to see this kind of a scene. Next slide, please. Feeding coyotes is illegal in Marin, as well as in the state of California. In Marin, it's an infraction, which means we will do our best to educate, but it's really important that people understand the why behind that. And the why behind that is because coyotes that have been fed by humans will eventually see humans as a mobile vending machine, and they'll want to push our buttons for a food dispersal every time they see us. And I've responded to coyotes that had been fed fast food and knew the sound inside of a Taco Bell and McDonald's bag and came running. That's what happens. They become so habituated to it, and it's harder to do what we know we need to do, which is hazing. So we really don't want anyone in Marin feeding any wildlife, but really specifically coyotes. Next slide, please. So we talked about this. Our main goal is not to be heavy-handed, going after people. You won't go to jail for feeding a coyote, but you will really be creating a neighborhood issue that creates more problems than just a fed coyote. You will create a public safety potential that we will have to respond to. And if it's a coyote that is not able to be hazed properly, it's not a good thing. So if you have any neighbors that are actually purposely feeding animals, we want to know about it, and we will go out, we'll educate, and we will monitor, and we will hope to make sure that it doesn't continue. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about hazing. This is the hardest part to teach people. And when we say hazing, we're saying we want that animal to just really fear us. And for some of us to be taught how to do this, people don't know how to scream. I'm really good at screaming, and I'm probably the biggest screamer when there's an earthquake or something startles me. You will hear me. But to train everyday people on how to do this towards a coyote has been very challenging. So when we say be as loud, as obnoxious as you can, you probably need to do that 10 times what you think you can do, and you really need to practice. And I know your neighbors will think you're in need of some help, but this is really important, because the more people and neighbors that do this, the better chances that we have better coexistence. Next slide, please. Here's a nice little acronym for those of you that can learn by this. So we want you to first, when you come across a coyote, stop. Don't run, don't turn your back. Then you want to make yourself look as big as possible, raise your arms, use your jacket, whatever you can do to, just get the impression that you're way bigger than you are. We use our voice very forceful and strong. And I thought about this earlier. When I first started as an animal services officer, we had so many loose dogs that we were responding to, and there were so many dogs that we couldn't catch and couldn't entice with a treat or coming to us. And so for those dogs that we couldn't catch, we actually used this technique to send them to their home. And every dog I ever did this forceful voice of go home took me right to his door. They were usually all unneutered males, but that's a really good skill to just tell that coyote, go home, and really mean it. Repeat this and continue repeating it until that coyote goes the way you want them to go. And then T is for teaching. Teach anyone, friends, family, kids love this. This is the one opportunity kids to get permission to be obnoxious. And they do a really good job teaching us adults how to be obnoxious. So kids, teach your parents, teach everyone you can, because you do it the right way. Next slide, please. Tools that we have found really useful, probably the best one that doesn't cost anything but maybe a few pebbles and an old can, is what we call a shaker can, where you can either put coins or pebbles in an empty aluminum can, tape over the top, and shake it. And that has amazing power of freaking out anybody, including ourselves. But that's a really simple thing people can walk with if they want on their trails. You can make them in all different sizes depending on what you can find, and they're easy to do. There's some great other things like those of you that have dogs, you probably know the famous tennis ball chuckers. Those work with our dogs. They were great at tossing something in the direction of a coyote. Anything with sound, as Kelly already talked about. Some of our neighborhoods have loved using super soaker, squirt guns, toys. There's amazing kid toys out there, but it can be simple as, maybe a pot and pan, a whistle, drums, whatever makes loud noise, what you want. And there are two products, pepper spray and halt. Pepper spray and halt you should always use with caution. Halt is a product explicitly for dogs. Pepper spray does not always work on canines, so we would use that with caution. Next slide, please. When not to haze is when you think there's an animal that is in an appropriate area that's just minding his own business. Maybe he's off of Shoreline Trail in Santa Fe. Maybe he's up in open space. That's a good area. That's where we want him. We don't need to necessarily haze them unless they're, coming towards you, or if you have a dog. The other part of that equation is if an animal is sick or injured. Unfortunately, we do see our share of mange infested coyotes, and there's some recent information that attributes certain rodenticides that create this condition. So we do respond to quite a few coyotes that are really become debilitated through mange, or they're hit by cars. So if they're sick or injured, we don't want you to haze them. If the coyote's cornered in a place where they have no escape, never do that. That seems like common sense, but we want them to have the easiest way to run away from us. Den sites, as Shannon already mentioned, they're going to be doing whatever they can to protect their pups. And so we need to respect that. And they may move those pups. We don't know, but that would be an area that we would use caution. And anytime we have baby animals with any wild animal, it's time to take heed, to be wise, not to get too involved. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are all of the things we have done in Marin. And I think the most important part here is as many different scenarios we can make for coyotes to experience hazing from is really ideal. I think our biggest challenge in Marin are people out taking pictures. And, they want that great picture of a coyote, but if we could get all those people that have cameras to haze coyotes, oh, that would be golden, because that's the problem. They start seeing people in certain scenarios where they feel more comfortable, whether it's people on a bike or people pushing a stroller, tourists we've talked about before, but any of these scenarios, I think would help in the big picture of getting everybody on the same hazing page. Next slide, please. This is a 3-minute video
very fortunate to have
from a city in Florida, and I think it's worth watching just to kind of show you what another community has done. So it's about 3 minutes, and hopefully you're viewing it. Your computer will show through. Many opportunities and benefits to improve our quality of life. Having such a diverse ecosystem means that we have to be very mindful and aware of the living beings that live within it, including coyotes. Coyotes are very commonly found within North America in both rural and urban environments. Their role in the natural ecosystem is to control rodent and other small animal populations. Seeing a coyote in our natural environment is not necessarily cause for alarm. However, as they have adapted to urban environments and residents have tolerated them, coyotes can begin to lose their fear of humans and seek refuge and easy food within our neighborhoods and near our homes. When this happens, it is important that the entire community take action to ensure that the coyote keeps its fear of humans.
There's a simple, safe way to ensure coyotes remain fearful of humans and know that our homes are off limits. It's called hazing. Hazing involves making the coyote feel uncomfortable and unwelcome. It involves using actions or noises that it may not be used to and will perceive as a threat. It is important to know that the coyote is more afraid of you than you are of it. To let a coyote know they're not welcome on your property, stand tall and raise your arms. Yell at the coyote, "Go away." Stamp your feet and make short advances towards the coyote. Use noisemakers. Clap your hands or blow a whistle. Throw sticks or other small items in the direction of, but not directly at the coyote. The coyote may not immediately run away when you yell at him. If this happens, you may need to advance a bit more towards the coyote and increase the intensity of your hazing. You can try spraying the coyote with a hose or even a super soaker. It is important to continue to haze the coyote until he completely leaves the area. As well as hazing, you should ensure your property is an unwelcome environment by removing attractants. Do not leave garbage or compost outside. Do not leave small pets unattended on your property. And remove any brush piles or small enclosures a coyote might perceive as a comfortable resting place or den. Hazing coyotes should only take place in areas where they don't belong, such as your yard or schoolyard. You should not haze a coyote that you spot at a distance or in an area where it is expected, such as a woodland or field. If you encounter a coyote while out for a walk, keep any children you may have next to you. If your pet is small, pick it up and hold it in your arms. Do not turn your back on the coyote. Never corner a coyote if you are hazing. Always make sure it has an escape route. Do not haze a coyote if it is injured or sick, or if it has pups or near a den with pups.
Repeated and ongoing hazing is the best way to ensure that coyotes remain fearful of us. If you encounter a coyote that you believe to be sick or injured, contact your local animal control or animal shelter for support.
Reducing conflict with coyotes requires community involvement. Everyone needs to take action. Share these tips with your neighbors and teach your children about what to do if they encounter a coyote.
Okay, next slide. Thank you. That's a good overview. So I think in wrapping up what hazing is, we're really teaching an animal. They're very quick to learn. They're very quick to adapt. They will be teachable for the most part. And, don't give up on that hazing. There are very few coyotes that we've had here in Marin haven't been able to be hazed. We just need to up the intensity, change strategies, change people. But if everybody could help us with that, we will be teaching coyotes. Next slide, please. And then keeping pets safe. This is probably the most common concern that comes my way. And my little dog Phil is pictured here. There's no doubt in my mind, my little 6-pound terrier Phil would have no problem running up to a coyote and saying, get the heck out of here. But I also know that if he did that, he would be one shake away from death. And so it's my job to keep Phil and all of my animals safe. So we really want to urge safe confinement and supervision. If you know you're in an area where there are coyotes and you're out for a walk, make sure your dog is on a leash. We have a lot of issues in some of the San Rafael parks with the leash law. We work really hard to get our officers out to enforce the leash law, but all of this, adds concern on coyote front, especially this time of year when we have more active coyotes. They will eat cats, as I've mentioned. They get quite good at it. They will, if they feel threatened by other dogs, they will defend their territory. We have had dogs, especially small dogs, injured and killed by coyotes in Marin. So it's really up to us as pet guardians to keep our pets safe. And as Kelly mentioned so well, there's so many new products and ways to provide an outdoor experience, especially for cats. We need to up our ability to keep cats safe in Marin. Next slide, please. And if you didn't know all the dangers that are out there for the animals, I can tell you that there are many, and I've seen just about all of these and then some. But you got to weigh what's right for your own pets. But we would really encourage, especially for cats, being enclosed in a safe environment, whether inside your house or in a cat-proof patio or cattery. Okay, next slide. Okay, and I know feral cats sometimes pop up. I don't know in San Rafael too many of these colonies in the areas we're targeting right now, but if we do have folks feeding feral cats as part of a management, which we appreciate, we just want to make sure they're not leaving food out unnecessarily. So responsible feral cat feeding means only putting out the amount that a cat consume right then and there, having a lifetime caretaker. And some feral cat folks have actually designed shelters where they feed cats inside a coyote-proof or wildlife-proof container. I think the next slide, if you could put it up, Michelle, kind of gives you an idea. And these are used quite a bit on the East Coast as well, where they have harsher winters. But if you do know someone that does feral cat feeding, really emphasize that we don't want their efforts to become a wildlife attractant and an easy menu item for coyotes. So I think that's all. I think we're going to be switching to questions next. So advance the slide one more time. And I believe we have our contact information on the next slide, if you wouldn't mind. So all three of us on this panel are always more than happy to answer your questions or follow up with information. We've listed our emails, but we also have our phone numbers on all of our websites. And with that, I think I'm going to shift it back over to Lisa to facilitate our questions.
Sure. Thank you so much. Hopefully you all can hear me okay. I know my sound quality wasn't so good earlier, but we do have a few questions in the Q&A, and others can feel free to add. I'm just going to, the first one we have, I don't know, Shannon, it might be best for you. The question is it normal for them, coyotes, to be seen midday? I always thought they prefer early morning or evening.
No, actually, they can be out at any time of day, and especially during the breeding season, when they've got a lot of mouths to feed, they're looking for food around the clock. And coyotes actually are diurnal animals, but when they're around humans, they tend to be more nocturnal, just because they want to avoid us. But it's not uncommon to see a coyote during the day, and it doesn't mean they're sick or anything like that.
Okay. Thank you. And then the second question someone has, and any panelists can take it. Will coyotes attack humans? We have witnessed a dog get chased by a coyote, and then a couple others from the pack joined to get into a scuffle with the dog. As an owner, is it safe to get into the middle of something with multiple coyotes?
I would say that's a very tense situation that I would firmly say use extreme caution. We do have coyotes that attack dogs. We respond to those whenever we have them, by the way, and we welcome that as an emergency call that our officers would respond to. But I would be leery of getting in the middle of that. And I think that's why it's so important to have good control of our dogs and our pets. Coyotes generally in that scenario, and we actually had one of our staff encounter, I think it was 3 coyotes against a German Shepherd on a trail. And, you know, she was convinced that the coyotes were trying to lure her dog away, when in fact, it was probably what we've been talking about, is they're defending their territory. They see dogs as a threat to that territory, and they're going to do everything in their power to try and convince our dogs of that. So I say that's a tough scenario, and one that I would never want to intervene on. I think got to remember that coyotes are going to fear humans more than we fear them for the most part. And the behavior that they're giving off is really trying to tell us, you know, fear me, because I'm doing everything in my power to tell you that you should fear me, when in fact, they're scared out of their minds most of the times in those scenarios. And interesting, you know, when our officers actually have to capture a coyote, the typical behavior that we see is they just freeze. Like, you wouldn't expect that. We get some really bad dogs that we have to handle that are not easy. But when we handle coyotes, we can actually get our tools around them, we can net them, and they just freeze. And I think that's one of the things we've learned is, you know, they're so fearful that that's kind of the behavior we expect when we get involved. Kelly, I don't know if you've done rehab on coyotes, but
yeah, I worked in the wildlife hospital and worked on a ton of coyotes, and also we have non-releasable coyotes there. And we wear gloves because, you know, a tiny percentage might bite, but overall they're easier to handle than many domestic dogs, because I work for a small animal vet too. So I handle lots of domestic dogs in those situations, and you just put a towel over a coyote's head and, you know, they're just freeze. So they're very, very non-aggressive. And then when they're on rehab and they're out in our pens before release, they're like deer in those pens. If you just get anywhere within their eyesight, they're running that back fence wanting to get out. They're one of the most fear-based animals we get in there. So
Okay.
not aggressive at all.
Sorry, thank you. So the next question we have, it's about the packs of coyotes. Will the same coyotes continue to procreate and expand their pack? We noticed our local pack go from a couple to now over 8, at least in just a year, which has been concerning. Could this pack increase to 20 or more?
It's not going to increase to 20. That just doesn't happen. And I think you need to remember the natural history of coyotes and what time of year it is. So if you're seeing 8 coyotes together, it's because the coyotes of this year have not dispersed yet. It's just their babies from this year, and they will soon disperse and be out on their own, and it'll go back to the carrying capacity it had originally. So coyotes will not overpopulate. This is a common misconception that people worry about them overpopulating, but they monitor their own populations. All predator species do, because of their territorial natures and because of the biological mechanisms within them and how they respond to reproductively. So they just don't willy-nilly overpopulate. It just won't happen. They won't tolerate that many coyotes in their territories.
Okay, thank you. I see just a couple more questions in the Q&A. So just a reminder that you can post your questions there. We have allocated time during this webinar to answer your questions, so don't be shy. Another question we have is, as part of hazing, should you try to chase them? We've tried an air horn and hose, and they just move out of reach and sit and stare at us. If we move rapidly to them, could that be successful hazing?
Yes, that's exactly what we want you to do. And, you know, make sure that there's no pups around, there's no den nearby, which, you know, if you're just coming across a coyote, you're going to have to chase them or, you know, have some forward movement towards them. What we usually see is they'll run 10 feet, they'll stop, they'll turn around, they'll look at you. Are you really going to come after me? And you're going to continue that behavior. You're going to continue your forward motion, your big motion, your obnoxious, high pitched, whatever voice you can come up with in that moment to just really let them fear you. And that's really hard to get people to do. We're not asking you, you know, this isn't a mountain lion or bear. You know, this is a 20 to 40 pound little dog with a lot of fur that's purposely making you feel it's much bigger and bolder than it really is. And some coyotes, when I think back of the first ones that we worked with 20 plus years ago, it was hard to get us to behave properly to convince them to move. So it does require really assertive actions on our part, like just get in a mad mode. If you want to punch a pillow, take it out in your hazing mode, because they're not going to take us serious if we're not really intimidating. So scream as loud, chase as you want, throw things at them. You know, I live in the country in Sonoma County, and I have chickens and I have a lot of predators. And interestingly, a coyote last year was passing through. I back up to a vineyard, and all the birds knew that the coyote was there. It took me a minute to figure out what was going on. But when I did, it's like, oh, geez, that's not a dog, that's a coyote. Oh, haze. And so just immediately that loud voice throwing things at him, he did the same thing that I was expecting, ran about 10 feet, stopped, turned around, looked at me, and he did that for about 4 sessions. Never hazed him before, doubt that he'd been hazed ever, but it worked. And didn't see him again. Might have been just passing through, doing a little perimeter check on his territory. But it's important that we just really be assertive when we haze.
Okay, thank you. How do you know if a coyote is near a den with pups?
Well, 2 things. We know that we'll usually see, you know, here's the problem. We don't know any one coyote from 10 other coyotes. I should have mentioned that, you know, there is a radio collaring program going on in the southern part of the GGNRA through the National Park Service. And we love that, because if we can pinpoint like where these coyotes end up, it's helpful, but we don't know that. So one coyote may to us be 10, but when we see 2 adults in one area, this is safe to say that there's probably something special in that area. It's time of year, as Shannon mentioned. She also told us that, you know, there are multiple den sites, but when you start seeing pups dispersing and they look like bigger than sin, darling little puppies, just like you would have a German Shepherd puppy, which was one of our concerns. Like, oh gosh, people want to feed coyotes. What are they going to do when they see a baby coyote pup? So you'll see the parents out with them. You'll often sometimes see the yearlings from last year joining or staying with the pack. And so you'll see this mixture of different sizes. And I think to know that a den is in your areas, you're going to see this routine behavior. Well, they'll come either together, they'll come back and forth because they might be feeding pups. And I think the other interesting thing we've learned is they're not going to come out, they're not going to let those pups come out of the den until they know that they're ready. And by the time they come out of that den, they're pretty mobile and they're pretty adept at what their environment is like. They're not coming out when they're teeny tiny. They're staying in there when they're, you know, at the right time that mom and dad feel that they're ready to take on the world.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. Someone else said in Bay Point, coyotes have taken over one of our islands. We think they've eaten most of the birds and eggs. What can be done?
Yes, that's the dilemma of Mother Nature. And, you know, that's Marin has such vast wildlife. And so on one hand, we love it because we learn and we watch and we, love our birding, but it's also food for coyotes and other animals for that part. Raccoons love eggs. So the whole concept of an island is great because you think, oh, well, they're somewhat protected, which in fact they are. But I think it's also how easily available food sources are. Coyotes in Marin will go for the easiest option. So I know when that development started out, there was a lot of concern about the wildlife there, and there still is. And I don't know that we can tell coyotes what's on the menu. We really try our best to keep pets off the menu. And Garrett from Fish and Wildlife, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that question. Feel free to jump in, but yeah, there's wildlife all over Marin, and it's going to happen. And I think as hard as it is to see it, hear it, be part of it, it's just kind of what happens. Garrett, I don't know if you can unmute yourself. Oh, there. Do you have anything to add to that question? That's right up your alley. You're with California Fish and Wildlife and one of our favorite partners to work on these wildlife issues. What are your thoughts on that question?
I think you covered it pretty well, Cindy. I don't think there's a whole lot that can really be done other than people doing their part in their communities to remove human attractants for coyotes that might entice them to stay longer or have more babies if there's plenty more resources around. And so we don't want to up necessarily the carrying capacity in areas where we live by giving them access to outdoor cats, to pet food, removing things like sources of water, fallen fruit like we talked about, compost piles, bird feeders even spill seeds all the time, and they can attract rodents, which then attract the coyotes. So that's pretty much, otherwise, if it's just Mother Nature doing what Mother Nature does, then we don't tend to have too much of concern about it. But humans do obviously play a huge role in that. So anything that we can do on our end to try to minimize those conflicts is really the best bet there.
Yeah, I think it's probably also good to mention, a lot of people think it's really fun to feed the ducks and the geese, and I don't know that that's happening at that particular spot. But if we see that, just know that that's another potential problem that will not only be harmful for the waterfowl, and especially now we have highly pathogenic avian influenza that we're greatly concerned about throughout the state of California and the country. And it's in Sonoma County, it's in Contra Costa County, it will be coming to Marin, and waterfowl is one of the species that's, great risk for it. So the more we can not encourage people not to feed waterfowl, that would be important too, in the whole scheme of that cycle of who eats what.
Okay, thanks. Another question regarding hazing. Someone said, the last time I saw one, I did haze. Yay, thank you for that. My dog went crazy barking. I was worried that would make the coyote want to attack. So would a barking dog want to encourage a coyote to attack?
Well, that's a good question. In West Marin, we have wonderful livestock protection dogs. Most of them are Great Pyrenees and Anatolian Shepherds, and they're used as predator protection against mostly sheep out there. And barking is what they do best. And it works quite well, at least in that scenario. Urban wise, I think our urban coyotes get to know dog barking just like cats get to know about being around dogs. So I think it's one of those individual things and the type of dog that's barking. Any of our panelists want to weigh in on that?
I think it's just important if you're hazing and you have your dog with you to make sure it's obviously leashed and right by your side, because if it's a small dog, you certainly don't want it aggressively approaching the coyote in any way, shape, or form, because even if it wasn't planning to attack, that could certainly lead to one. And also, if you're hazing, you want to make sure whatever method you use, if you're going to be using it while you walk your dog, is that your dog is kind of desensitized to it, so it doesn't scare your dog as you're hazing a coyote.
Yeah, good point. And the other point is, coyotes see and hear, they know dog language better than we do. And remember that our dog may be giving the coyote signs that we may not understand or actually will completely miss. If I had Phil on a walk, there would be no way I'd want him barking. In fact, I would turn his head behind me. I'd pick him up, turn his head so he's not even facing the coyote for that very reason. We don't want reactive dogs creating reactive displays by coyotes. So I guess the bottom line there is let's teach our dogs not to bark at coyotes if it means that coyote wants to try and engage with a dog.
And dog owners, all of us do this. Our dog is always innocent. It wasn't doing anything. And this coyote aggressive, the whole myth about coyotes are luring dogs back to a pack to be killed is there's no scientific evidence that happens. What does happen, I've seen it happen over and over again, is that off-leash dogs chase a coyote who then runs back to, some pack members who might be in the area. And then they come to his defense. But there's absolutely zero evidence that they do a coordinated attack by trying to lure a domestic dog. It's usually our dog's fault, which I know is hard to accept sometimes. We think our dogs are playing, but they chase coyotes relentlessly, and it's really stressful for coyotes. They don't like it.
Okay. This next question says, we noticed coyotes sitting in front of our property while their pups seem to be hunting, we think. We assume they sit in front of our house because of them seeing our dog previously. How long is this training period usually? And how often? Is it once a year, seasonal?
I'm assuming the training period is for the
I think
parents
I think
teaching
she's
the
referring
pups.
to the coyote parents teaching their pups about hunting, perhaps?
Yeah. Shannon, Kelly, you want to give a try at that one?
Well, this time the training is going to right now, like this time of year, they always have here in California, generally they have their pups mid-April. So by this time of year, the pups are pretty much, learn to hunt. So if you just take the time of year into mind, by the time you get into fall, their training's over. Those pups might still be traveling with the parents, but are certainly capable of hunting on their own.
Okay.
And I think, it should be noted, we also note that, we track coyote encounter reports if people want to let us know. We seem to have activity in Marin that can stretch all the way through to December, depending on rain and weather. But it's very common for us to receive more of our calls about coyote concerns, from now we're in the hot zone through sometimes, November, December.
Okay. Someone asked, someone said many of our fences in Bay Point are 6 feet tall. Can a coyote jump that height?
A 6 feet tall fence, it depends on what kind of fence it is. Generally, that's enough to repel a coyote. It also depends on the attractant, but normally a 6-foot fence, if you had coyote rulers on the top, that's ideal. But if it's the type of fence where, it's got 2x4s horizontally, or it's chain link or something where they can gain some purchase, they can usually get over it. That's why we always recommend the coyotes rollers on top. It depends on the resources that are inside the place that's fenced, because if there's no great resources in there, you're probably not going to have coyotes going in there. Also, coyotes, most wildlife, mountain lions, coyotes, they don't like jumping into something if they can't see a way out. So I always like to encourage people, if you've got a fence with no rollers on it, and there's areas where you can see out, if you put shade cloth, and they sell strips of shade cloth with grommets on them, and I always recommend shade clothing around. It keeps your pets from barking at wildlife, alerting the animals that they're there, and it keeps wildlife from being able to see in, because even if a wild animal knows there's a dog in there, once they get eyesight on them, it can elicit the prey drive a lot stronger than it otherwise would.
That's a really good point. And I also want to just take the opportunity to emphasize what you said, Kelly, about what is the attractant, because if it's a very easy, simple jump over, because whatever that attractant is so strong, they're more likely to jump over that 6-foot fence. If it's harder for them and there's less attractants, then they're not going to bother. So remember, they're going to want to take the easiest, speediest way of surviving, whether it's eating, hunting, whatever. So we've had that scenario quite a lot, especially with fruit trees, neighboring fruit trees behind a fence. And people are concerned about, why is this coyote jumping my fence? And I always ask, well, what's in your backyard? Do you have any fruit trees? Oh yes, we have apple trees. Well, there you go. Make sure you pick up your fallen fruit, pick your fruit before you can. And that's what maybe might be drawing them, along with any rodents that the fruit may be drawing.
Okay, let's see. We are going to be out of time pretty soon, but a couple more things. Someone said, I noticed this session is being recorded. Can you send the recording to us? I assume we can share the recording, right? The recording, yes? Cindy?
Yes, we are planning to share the recording far and wide. Please feel free to forward it to anyone that would benefit from it. Our goal tonight is to really provide a oversight and education about Coyote Coexistence 101. We've, targeted San Rafael because there are a number of neighborhoods that are experiencing some concerns and have questions. So we're here to provide what other details anyone might need. And I believe we will also be putting a resource list together that will be a part of that recording as well.
Okay, thank you. We do have a comment from a resident at Spinnaker Point. She says she finds it unacceptable that they've been waiting since July 22nd to have more help from you. I'm assuming she means Marin Humane, except for a flyer. My understanding, the city has a contract with you for animal control, but we haven't had anything since, except for a Zoom organized by Jill Rodby. We needed your help. I had your flyer translated into Spanish and posted them along the Bay Trail, but I think it's unclear what other help they're looking for, but sounds like there was some unhappiness in not feeling like we were as responsive as we could have been.
I'll take full responsibility for that. I apologize profusely, and I'm sorry that happened. To be honest, I was on 2 weeks off, and our CEO advised us that we had received this concern about the coyotes. And as soon as I came back, full throttle behind the scenes, doing a lot of trying to get this set up, working with San Rafael, providing interpretation, getting the word out through your homeowners associations. Fortunately, we've had so many wonderful San Rafael residents helping us get the word out, from helping design their own flyers to translating. We do have those resources, and we will have signs coming that the city will be helping us put out. So my apologies that you feel that way, and that was certainly not our intent. We have been working very hard behind the scenes to try and make this webinar happen, to get interpreters on board, which we have 2 tonight, which we're very thankful of. We've worked with the city and many of the other neighborhoods. So I'm happy to have a conversation offline if there's anything else that we can improve in working together with our community on this topic.
Okay, let's see. Well, it looks like we are at 7:30. Was that our end time?
It was. I see Nancy, our CEO. I don't see a picture with her, but there's a hand raised, and I don't know if Nancy, if you're on this call, if you wanted to address something or say something. And Michelle, I don't know if you have the ability to.
Hey, Cindy, it's Kim Schaefer. I have my
hi,
hand
Kim.
up. I don't know if it
Okay.
was me or if you're looking for Nancy, and I'm sorry. I thought it went till 8. It looked like it went to 8, but anyway, and I apologize. I missed the first like 30 minutes. So if this has been addressed, ignore me and I'll ask you guys offline. But what is our best rationale or the best response to people who inquire, like, why don't we just go pick up these coyotes and move them out of the neighborhoods and move them other places? I've asked this before, and I have a hard time remembering the answer because it's kind of complicated. But if you talked about that already, I don't want to waste people's time, but I think it's an interesting question, and I get it a lot, and it's a hard one to, kind of rationalize why. Well, that sounds like that'd be perfect to do. Just do that.
Yeah, we did cover that in terms of population. So
Okay.
Maybe we could share that with you, Kim, offline.
Okay, no problem.
Well, it is important to know that it's against the law to relocate coyotes in the state of California or any wildlife.
Any wildlife,
So,
right?
Yeah, so that's against the law. And also, they have very tight family bonds. And you'd have to somehow manage to trap every family member so you don't orphan dependent young or cause the same reaction when coyotes leave that area. You're going to have transient coyotes come and reclaim that territory. So you're just going to have more coyotes move back in. So it really doesn't solve anything, which is one of the reasons why it's become against the law to relocate wildlife. It doesn't solve any problems.
Thank you so much for that concise recap.
And on
Yeah,
the
this is
topic
Garrett.
on the topic of,
Lisa, could you let Garrett weigh in on that
oh,
topic?
sure.
Thank you.
Yes, sorry about that. We get these questions a lot too. There's two really big reasons why the department or any agency in particular doesn't relocate coyotes or really any wildlife for that matter. The number one reason is when we move a coyote, it's naturally going to want to return back to its home range. I know we've probably already touched on that. And again, kind of what Kelly was saying with the familial ties, but if you take an animal and you drop it in totally foreign territory, it's not going to go, oh, this looks nice, I think I'll set up home here. It's going to go, where the heck am I? And I want to get back to where my home is. So more often than not, they'll cover tremendous terrain to get back to where, and they're really good at doing it too. All wildlife is. And a lot of times that puts them in harm's way because they're trying to cross major roadways or whatever they have to cross in order to get back home. And so a lot of times they get hit by cars when they do that. The other issue is that we could be taking, you know, a quote unquote nuisance coyote and just basically relocating it to another neighborhood. So if we put it back out in the habitat, it might find a different neighborhood and then start terrorizing that neighborhood. So really all we're doing is removing the problem around from neighborhood to neighborhood, which isn't addressing the real problem. So I think those are kind of the two big things that we typically tell people as for reasons why relocation is not an effective solution for population control.
Okay, thank you. I think we need to wrap it up. Sorry.
I was just going to ask if the interpreters had any Spanish guests that have any questions just before we close out, making sure that we help them if there are any questions. Charles, can you fill us in if we have any Spanish questions tonight?
Maybe not.
Okay, we don't know who is in the room, so we will assume that perhaps we don't have any, but certainly you have our emails. So if they do, we're happy to get back to them. I think that
There's
does it.
one last final question that I think is pretty interesting. And I know that other people have asked it before. Has it been considered using birth control darts to control the coyote population during their next breeding season?
No, but we'd love to do that for other species like rats and mice. And there is technology that we use in the captive wildlife world and in the zoo world and so on. But that's far from the reality, at least for coyotes. But I'm sure down the road, that's a management tool that will be useful in some areas. I think we've seen it work very successfully in other species when it's in island settings or, you know, control reasons. Even here in Marin County with the Park Service in Point Reyes, there were efforts with the non-native deer as well as the Tule elk. So I don't have any specifics on coyotes. And Kelly, I don't know if you have any knowledge of that.
We don't have the technology. There's a million reasons why we're not there yet, or even if it should be done, that, you know, we don't have time to go into tonight. But no, that's not on the horizon as of yet.
I also just wanted to add a couple points on that topic. It's definitely one that's being researched. It is kind of an interesting direction for the science, but there's really, I'm familiar with 3 types of quote unquote birth control, and that's, you know, there's surgical sterilization, there's hormonal disruptors, and then there's immunocontraceptives, basically birth control. So it's really complicated. And the problem is really, what conflict are you trying to control? For example, if you're trying to prevent cat and dog attacks, a sterilized coyote is still going to attack dogs and cats. So really the question you have to ask yourself with regards to birth control is, what is the conflict that you're trying to control? And in most cases, it's probably not going to address the issue.
Well stated. Thank you.
Okay, panelists, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would just like to say, you know, we really appreciate your attention tonight and in the future, and we want you to feel part of the community building around creating these peaceful coexistence with coyotes and all wildlife. And Marin Humane is here to help whenever. Our main number is 415-883-4621, and we have an officer available 24 hours. So if anyone is ever in a situation that they need help with, please call. We're lucky to have such a united coalition around this topic in Marin, and we're blessed with many of the experts that have spoken tonight. And we just want to make sure that the community has all the tools that they need to feel comfortable living with coyotes. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great evening.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.